LBC 97.3. Call 0845 6060973. Text 84850. Have your say on London's biggest conversation with Ian Dale.
And a very warm welcome to the LBC Book Club. Now today, our guest is Peter Sissons. He'll be a face that's known to many of you. Obviously you can't see him at the moment, but if you were watching Loose Women earlier on today, he made a guest appearance on that. Not a programme that I must admit I would relish going on, but I thought he did tremendously well. Well, he's published his memoirs. It's called When One Door Closes. Now, I've got to make a declaration of interest here before we start, because my publishing company, because by day I am a publisher, my publishing company published this book, so we'll get that one straight out of the way. But I'm not going to ask him patsy questions. Well, I hope I'm not. Anyway, no. Well, Peter, welcome to the programme. What's the experience of writing your memoirs been like? Has it been a cathartic experience? Has it brought back things that you sort of pushed to the back of your mind?
Well, it was not easy, because I spent the whole of my professional life writing 200-word news stories. And when I was given the deadline to write this book, I suddenly had to compose thousands of words, tens of thousands of words, and it took a real effort of will to apply myself. But the lodestone was not to produce a great profound work about my views about broadcasting and the future and everything, but to write about what I wanted to write about, which was the highlights of 45 years in news. I've left a heap of stuff out. Perhaps that's the next book. But I just loved trawling through all the memorabilia, and I've kept a heap of stuff, and trawling through my own memories and asking my wife what she remembers about things, and going through my old diaries, and sorting my life out all over again. It was a great experience. Yes, there was an element of catharsis there. And
let's start off with your childhood, because I have to say, when I often read autobiographies, I skip the childhood because they can be incredibly tedious. But actually yours was fascinating, because you grew up in Liverpool. You were growing up with some people who became incredibly famous afterwards. Tell us a little bit about your childhood.
Well, it was a very poor childhood. I was born in 1942, about a year after the pounding Liverpool took in the Blitz. I had two older brothers already who had lived through all that, and my father was away in the Royal Naval Reserve during the war, and I didn't see him till the war ended. I didn't see him till I was 3. And my mother was effectively a single mother for the whole of that time, and was a saint. She was just so strong and so determined that we would have the best possible start in life, despite her having nothing really to give us apart from love. And the overriding thing which she had at the back of her mind, which she never discussed with us, but all her actions reflected this belief, was that she wanted her boys to be educated, to have a good education. And she went to an inner-city school, Granby Street School, in Toxteth in Liverpool, one of the toughest areas of Liverpool, which she left, I think, when she was 13 or 14. She had copperplate handwriting, could spell, never made a grammatical mistake, could add up, had good basic skills, and went to work in one of the Liverpool big shops, Lewis's, and it was as working in the beauty department there that she met my father one day. But she was a remarkable woman, and I owe her everything, as do my brothers, because my eldest brother Cliff, who was the trailblazer, he became a consultant physician. John, the one between me and Cliff, also went to university, but there's another story there, because he was given 6 months to live when he was very little. And David, my youngest brother, he's younger than me, was the only one who was born when our father was in the country. and he became a GP as well.
And describe your relationship with your father, because I guess it was typical of many wartime families in that you were growing up as a child and really didn't know your father.
I didn't know
until
him.
he came back. What effect did that have on your relationship?
I didn't know him, and I didn't have a relationship with him. I don't know why that is. I think probably all they say about bonding being done in the first few months almost of life was true in that case. I didn't really like him. My first encounter with him, he gave me a good beating when he came back from the war. I never saw him read a book or express any interest in anything remotely sort of artistic, or listen to music, or he'd listen to comedy programs on the radio. That was about all he seemed to be interested in. And he believed firmly that his boys should leave school as soon as possible and go out and earn a living. And I don't know whether my mother and him rowed about it, but she certainly got her way. We didn't. We all went to university, and we all had successful lives as a result. But if it had been left to my father, God knows.
I mean, when you look back on those days, you now live in Sevenoaks and obviously have had a very successful career. How often do you think about those days back in Liverpool? Because, I mean, you describe in the book, I mean, it really was a very, very poor upbringing.
Well, I love Liverpool. I think it's a terrific town. I think at one point in the book I say I had what I consider the ideal background for a journalist. I was born in Liverpool, poor family, no money. If I needed any pocket money, I had to earn it. I had a variety of jobs throughout my teens to try to earn some money, always short of money. Took nothing for granted. No silver spoon in the mouth. A lot of experience of life. And eventually, because I was fortunate enough to have a good education, I got what many people would consider a dream job, a traineeship at the nascent ITN. In 1964. Now, the book is in that sense, it's a story of social mobility. It's I don't know if you saw Andrew Neil's programme about his background the other day.
I recorded it. I haven't watched it yet.
But there were similarities. He came from a poor Glasgow background. I had the advantage of going to grammar school, as I did. And it set me thinking, today, with my background, could I have done what I did if we'd had to pay for any part of my education? And I'm not so sure that we could. What the grammar school did, with all its defects, because the principal defect being that those who didn't get there did get a second-class education, with all its defects, it did pick out and give opportunity to bright kids from poor backgrounds who could never otherwise have aspired to what that pathway led to. And
there was a huge number of graduates of Liverpool Grammar School that went on to do very great things, weren't there? What was it? What was it about that school that was so special?
Liverpool had a handful of terrific grammar schools, wonderful grammar schools. There was the Collegiate, the Holt, Liverpool Institute, Quarry Bank. That was the core of them, but there were others spread around the periphery, which were equally good. Although I believe the Liverpool Institute, the one to which I went, was the best, but I'd say that, wouldn't I? But they had these terrific schools in Liverpool. There was a lot of competition between them, and they got fantastic results. In the year that I left the Liverpool Institute, I only got a commonership at Oxford, which meant, there was it was the lowest form of entry, if you like. But the Liverpool Institute School then, in that year, got 12 open scholarships, open awards, in mathematics alone. Now, even Eton didn't do that. It was a tremendous achievement. At that school, at the Liverpool Institute, to get your name on the honours board, it was no good getting a place at Oxford or Cambridge. My name wasn't on the honours board. You had to get an open award, a scholarship or an exhibition to get on the honours board. So somewhere in a dusty corner it lies the honours board for my year. My name's not on it.
What is it about Liverpool, though, that I always think successful people, famous people who come from Liverpool, they love it so much that they never go back there. They always live somewhere else.
Well, that's the charge that is often raised, and I think there is some justification in it, except when you examine the circumstances. I applied for a job when I left university at the Liverpool Daily Post and Echo, the local paper, and they turned me down. And after that I applied for a job at Thompson Newspapers, who offered me a job as a trainee on the Stockport County Express. But within a day or two I'd seen the editor of ITN, the great editor of ITN, Sir Geoffrey Cox, and he offered me a job as an ITN graduate trainee, and I wrote to Thompson's and said, do you mind if I don't come? And they were a bit cross, actually. But my first choice, if the Liverpool Daily Post and Echo had said yes, then my career would probably have taken shape there, as did some very, very prominent people. And John Sargent started there, Robin Oakley, who was the BBC's political editor, and a host of other big names started on the Liverpool Daily Post and Echo, terrific newspapers.
Now, I can't detect any Liverpool accent in your voice. Does it ever reappear at any point?
You've not got tanked up with me yet, Ian.
This is true. We did have a very good lunch once, didn't we? But,
it does resurface after several drinks. But again, when I started at ITN in the mid-60s, Sir Geoffrey Cox made it quite plain that he wanted people with accents that wouldn't betray their background, that no one could, that wouldn't distract from what they were saying. You wouldn't start listening to, I can tell he's a Geordie sort of thing, or I can tell he's a Scouser. It had to be neutral. So the vestiges of my Liverpool accent, which I had then, and which frankly I did cultivate for a while when I was at Oxford, because the Beatles were very fashionable, and it had some effect.
Well, we're going to come on to the Beatles. We're going to come on to your days at ITN in the 1960s in just a second. It's 9:15. And you're listening to the LBC Book Club with me, Ian Dale, and today my guest in the studio is Peter Sissons, who's published his autobiography, When One Door Closes. Now, we were talking about your Liverpool upbringing earlier, and of course you were at school with several members of the Beatles. Not all of them, I think.
No, at primary school, there's a famous photograph which came to light a few years ago. At our little primary school, Dovedale Road School, every summer, the top three classes in the juniors were taken to a camp in the Isle of Man, and a picture was taken then of some little boys on the beach, and it was published in the Daily Mail. At the front of the picture is the young John Lennon, and next to him is the young Jimmy Tarbuck, and the Mail asked, who is the other one? And it was me, and I knew as soon as I saw it, and my wife said, oh gosh, that's you. So I wrote in, and there's the proof. But when we, because at Dovedale Road also at that time, but not in the picture, was George Harrison as well. And when I passed the 11 plus, I went to the Liverpool Institute School. John Lennon went to Quarry Bank High School. George Harrison went to the Institute the year after I went, because he's a year younger than me, or he was a year younger than me. And at the Liverpool Institute there was also Paul McCartney, and Bill Kenwright was there at the same time as me, the West End impresario and chairman of Everton Football Club. Steve Norris, former mayoral candidate for London. It was a very, very talented bunch of kids. And of course, when Lennon left the Quarry Bank School, he went to the art school, Liverpool College of Art, which was next door to the Liverpool Institute. So we kept seeing him leaning on lampposts outside the school, meeting his friends from the Institute at the end of the day.
So your life could have been rather different. You could have been one of the Beatles.
Well, not really. One of my best friends at the Institute was a man called Ivan Vaughan, and he knew me very well. He also lived next door to John Lennon, and it was he who introduced Lennon to McCartney at a garden fete at our local church, St Peter's in Woolton, when they were playing in a well, Lennon and Vaughan were playing in a very, very awful group called the Quarrymen, and it really was ghastly. Any change would be an improvement, and Vaughan, Ivan, introduced McCartney to Lennon, and the improvement started then.
Well, let's move on to your career in journalism. What made you want to become a TV journalist?
Well, TV was new. We didn't have a TV set at home until about in Liverpool certainly till the early 60s. So the TV was a novelty. I got a taste for the journalism when I was at Oxford, and I've always been a great football fan, particularly of Liverpool, but because I was born a Liverpudlian rather than an Evertonian. But at Oxford I got the opportunity to write football reports for the university newspaper, Charwell. And I loved that. I thought it was terrific, sitting, watching something and then doing the interviews afterwards and writing it all up. And then the logical progression was, how can I, which form of journalism, well, having been turned down by the Liverpool Daily Post, which would be the real adventure? And I was lucky enough to be offered a graduate traineeship at ITN in the days when they only really took one or two a year. So I must have impressed the editor, Geoffrey Cox. But that was it was a little bit of accident about it. I mean, around about the same time, because I thought that perhaps I might not get any sort of job in journalism or TV. I applied for a teaching job in the West Country at a technical college in Bridgewater. And I didn't get it, quite rightly, because there were some much more experienced teachers applying for it. But if I had got it, if they had sort of taken leave of their senses and appointed me, I would have become a West Country schoolmaster. And
how your life might have been different.
Yeah.
Just before we move on from that, I've got to ask you about an event this evening. Fernando Torres going to Chelsea for, I think, £50 million. Andy Carroll signing for Liverpool for 35 million. I mean, the world's gone mad, hasn't it, in football?
Yes, and I think it was very good business for Liverpool. I think Torres is a shadow of the player that he was when they bought him. He doesn't look as if he wants to play for Liverpool. He's got that sulky demeanour on the pitch. Frankly, I think Chelsea are welcome to him. For 50 million, crumbs. You can do an awful lot with 50 million. And I think that Kenny Dalglish, who was one of my great heroes, he just shrugged his shoulders and said, if you don't want to play for the club, off you go.
Now, you originally wanted to be a foreign correspondent rather than a newsreader. Tell me about that.
Well, that was the glamour job, of course, with ITN. They had some terrific reporters when I joined. Gerald Seymour, John Edwards, Richard Lindley. They were the big, heavy hitters. And, of course, we all aspired, all those... Well, first of all, you aspired to be made a reporter, but you aspired to join the ITN's elite, the guys who went out on the big firefighting missions to cover the wars and the big overseas crises. And originally I was set to work writing scripts at ITN, and also on the subs desk with me was Michael Nicholson, who of course did become one of the finest big hitters and war reporters that ITN's ever had. And I was actually, to his immense chagrin, he was very miffed, made a reporter 2 weeks before he was. He didn't forgive me for a while. But anyhow, both he and I made it at much the same time, because that was the officer corps, as it were, of the reporters, and it was terrific to be made one of them and to be given some big overseas assignments so soon after being made a reporter, which I was. I was off to the Middle East, and then, of course, a year or two later, I was off to Biafra, which is where it all ground. Well, it was all ran into the ground, almost literally.
Well, and that's how the book starts. Tell us, to cut a long story short, you were shot.
Yes, I was sent to Biafra with a very, very experienced ITN film crew, Cyril Page and Archie Howell. Cyril incidentally died a few weeks ago, and at the age of 89, But he's the man I really owe my life to, because we were with a group of reporters, including an American crew, with a very, very experienced American reporter, Morley Safer, who appears now on 60 Minutes, one of the elder statesmen of American news, and a stills photographer from Time magazine called Priya Ramraka, and we were with a group of Nigerian commandos, and we got lost. Or we didn't think we were lost, but we thought we were well within the Nigerian lines, whereas in fact we'd strayed right to the front line, and we were ambushed by Biafrans and came under very, very heavy fire. Ramraka was killed, and I got separated from the others. I mean, it was really the most horrific. The firing must have gone on for a couple of hours. Very, very intensive, pinned down. I got separated from the others, and when I did eventually attempt to move to join them, I stood up from a sort of foxhole in which I'd been hiding, and I heard a man not very far from me, probably only about 10 yards. I couldn't see him, but I heard the twigs and the rustling, and then I heard a magazine being loaded into a gun, and then I knew that I was about to come under fire, thinking I was safe, but there's this great rush of adrenaline telling me that, no, I'm about to be shot at. And as I dived back into my foxhole, both my legs were up in the air, and although he fired a long burst at me, one round went through the top of both legs at very close range, very high velocity, and did a tremendous amount of the soil around the rim, inches from my head, until he sort of lost interest and went away, obviously thinking he'd got me. Which he had, of course, but he hadn't killed me. And when I looked down, from the waist, from my waist to the knees, because I had sort of light-coloured slacks on, it was just a mass of blood. And I thought at that moment that I knew a little bit about, if he's got my femoral artery, I have a couple of minutes.
Yeah.
But he hadn't. He'd missed my femoral artery by about half a centimetre. And when I hadn't passed out in those couple of minutes, I started to shout, and I shouted for help, and I shouted I was a British journalist, and a couple of Nigerian commandos came back up the road, found me, dragged me out onto the road, and there was still spasmodic fire coming in. They gave a bit of covering fire. The Major took his webbing off, wrapped it around the top of my legs, and they carried me back down the road to where Cyril and Archie, my camera crew, were waiting. And they started the process of getting me out of it all. But I had, because I've been in this mucky hole, bleeding heavily, all the wounds were full of soil and muck, which gave a lot of trouble for many months afterwards. Got very badly infected when we got home. There was a chance that the infection might have killed me even when I was back here in the orthopaedic hospital. But it was a very severe wound. I lost the sciatic nerve in my left leg, so I had to had a dropped foot for a while until that could be corrected with an operation about a year later. And perpetual pain on and off for many years afterwards. In fact, as I sit here, I can still feel what they call referred pain in my feet. Because of the damage to the nerves higher up the leg, I get pain in the feet, which of course weren't affected.
Well, in a moment we'll talk about the effect that it all had on your career, because effectively it spelled the end of your career as a foreign reporter. But there was light at the end of the tunnel.
One door opened.
Indeed. This is LBC 97.3. It's now 9:30.
LBC 97.3, Ian Dale.
And coming up at 10 o'clock is Clive Bull, who joins me now in the studio. Clive, what's on your programme?
Coming up, well, there's lots to talk about. Obviously, we've got that transfer window closing during the course of the programme, so we'll keep you up to date with any developments there. But the big one obviously, is Chelsea with this record-breaking £50 million, or we think it is at least. It's debatable whether that's money well spent or not, and whether you're a football fan or not. I'd like to know whether you think anyone is worth that sort of money, and whether it is a healthy thing for us to be getting involved in those sort of deals. We're also going to talk about, on a similar money theme, should school pupils be getting better financial training and education? Should it be compulsory in schools? A group of MPs, in fact quite a lot of them, have got together to say yes, financial education for young people has got to be pushed because they need to learn what they're doing with their money.
We're going to have a lot of compulsory things soon.
I know.
About a week ago I did a phone-in on whether manners should be taught compulsorily in primary schools.
I mean, there's so many things. There's not enough room on the curriculum, really, is there? And we're also going to talk about light pollution and whether you ever noticed the stars in the sky.
That is a really good topic, because in London it never really gets totally dark, does it?
No.
Whereas if you go up to Norfolk and it's absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, I only tend to notice the stars when I'm away somewhere else, on holiday, and you suddenly realise there's a sky full of stars out there.
Well, Clive will be joined by the stars at 10 o'clock.
Thank you.
And I've got a star with me for the LBC Book Club. Peter Sissons is with me. Peter, that was a radio link. I don't know if you've ever done radio, have you?
I've done a little bit of radio. I used to stand in for Nick Ross, on Call Nick Ross on Radio 4 years ago, when I first joined the BBC, taking the phone calls the first thing in the morning on some hot topic. And I've done one or two radio features, the most recent of which was about the Blitz in Liverpool in 1941. And I spent some time in Liverpool recording a quarter of an hour documentary, talking to some people who lived through it all. Absolutely fascinating.
Well, Peter Sissons is here because he's published his memoirs, When One Door Closes, out tomorrow. If you've got a question for Peter, the number to call is 0845 6060 973. You can, of course, text a question into 84850, or email Ian, IAIN, at lbc.co.uk, or tweet us at LBC973. Now, we were talking just before the news about the time that you were shot in Nigeria. Now, that did have a career-changing effect on your life, didn't it? Because you could no longer go travelling all around the world as a foreign correspondent.
For a start, I was very badly damaged, and I couldn't run. I was not very mobile. I still can't run very well. Even though, amazingly, a couple of years ago, I was asked if I would go on Strictly Come Dancing.
You could have been the Anne Widdecombe of that year.
No, they hadn't actually done their research as to why I would simply hobble around the dance floor. It was then that Don Sargent got his big chance. They asked him after they'd asked me first. But that's so. When one door closes, another one opens for him. But what were we talking about?
About the effect it had on your career.
Yes, well, I find that I've suddenly got crippling injuries, a lot of pain, can't run. What am I going to do? You can't be one of these energetic foreign reporters anymore. You've got to be able to move fast, you've got to be nimble. If you're not, you're going to get your crew into difficulties. You're all going to be in extra danger. So that was out of the question. But it was my good fortune that the British economy at that moment started to go down the tubes. You think it's bad today? Well, you and I both lived through the 70s, where it was a perpetual tale of catastrophe, practically right through the Heath government until the resignation of the Callaghan government, or the defeat of the Callaghan government. The whole of the 70s was industrial strife and economic calamity for Britain. I became ITN's industrial correspondent and then industrial editor, with responsibility for all its economics and industrial and aviation coverage, and it made my name. In the 70s, the industrial correspondent was a far more important person in many ways to the organisation than the political correspondent, because the Union barons, to many people, appeared to be running the country, and I got very close to the scene. I became chairman of the Labour and Industrial Correspondence Group. I was on the television, on News at 10, night after night after night, and I became a national broadcaster during that time.
And how did you then get into what ITN then called newscasting?
Well, during the time that I was industrial editor, I also got the chance to do stand-in newscasting. In fact, I first read News at 10 in 1968, when I was given the chance on the stand-in basis. Reginald Bosanquet was ill one night, and I did News at 10 with Leonard Parkin in 1968, and then through the 70s, with increasing frequency, I got asked to take time away from the industrial job, because we'd also employed two other correspondents, Michael Green and Giles Smith. I was freed up a little bit, and I could spend more time newscasting for ITN. And then in 1978, the editor of ITN, David Nicholas, gave me the ITN lunchtime news in succession to Leonard Parkin, who was moving back to, I think, the early evening news. Anyway, I did the lunchtime news for 4 years, and then in 1982, I was chosen to be the lead launch anchor of the new Channel 4 news, which was a terrific leg up for
And that
me.
was something very different, wasn't it? Because you weren't sitting there just behind a desk reading the news. You were an anchor. You were a presenter.
Yes, in the American sense.
Yeah.
You know, the anchors of the American news programs, the big networked programs, Rather and Brokaw and Jennings and Cronkite, they were not just news readers, they were anchors of not just the programme but of the organisation. They often carried rank editorially. They might even, some of them would actually edit the programmes which they presented. And I was an associate editor of Channel 4 News. I had enormous influence on what the programme covered, the shape of the coverage, the tone of the coverage. I was privy to its innermost deliberations. I had a tremendous 7 years on Channel 4 News.
And in a sense, that's still the same, I think, in Channel 4 News, and that John Snow, your successor, he's still there.
You'd never call John Snow a newsreader.
No.
He is the anchor of the programme. He dictates the tone, a lot of the content as well of the programme. He imposes his journalistic knowledge and often his journalistic will on the programme.
So why did you jump ship to the BBC in 1989?
Well, the short answer is they asked me and offered me a lot of money, but the real answer is a little bit more complex than that. I was 47 by then, and the decision I had to take was whether to finish my working life at ITN, which I'd already been at for 25 years. Now, the BBC had come in for me once before, a year or two previously, when, you read the book, but they offered me a very senior job, which, when I describe what was actually on offer, it'll take your breath away. But anyway, I turned it down. But when they came back for me, they offered me one thing which really took my fancy, and that was the chairmanship of Question Time. I would combine that with presenting either the 6 o'clock news or the 9 o'clock news for the BBC. And
now, you had a very hard act to follow on Question Time. With,
amazing.
Sir Robin Day.
Yeah.
And do you think, in retrospect, that there were too many people actually looking for you to fail at that?
Yes, I think you're right, and I've often thought that because of the publicity that surrounded my recruitment to the BBC and the amount of money I was paid, which was a lot of money in those days, although not quite as much by today's standards, I was always an outsider. And although the people who were most closely associated with bringing me to the BBC, Ron Neal and Tony Hall, gave me tremendous support and really believed in what I could offer and what I could bring to the BBC, they weren't there forever. And I gradually found myself, I wouldn't say isolated, but always aware of the fact that I was the one who came in from outside. And I think others who've done the same, who were recruited by the BBC from ITN, like Anna Ford, never really an insider at the BBC. Always never as close to the BBC's heart, or allowed to be as close to the BBC's heart, as those who spent most of their working life at the BBC. And the problem I had was with Question Time. I think there probably was a lobby at the BBC once Robin had decided to go to close the programme down. And they put me in because I think one or two people genuinely thought that the programme should go on and that I was the right person to do it, to take it on. But I think there were others also at work thinking, well, we've got him from ITN, this was the bait. We can always close Question down at some future stage. In my second year on Question Time, they changed the entire production team and put a very, very good in-house editor in, James Hogan, and I had a lot of fun with James for 12 months. But then it was put out to tender with an independent company. So I got my third editor in 3 years, and there was never a period of stability while I was on on Question Time, and I do believe that the most unsettling thing for a frontman is not to have a team around you that's always that lasts. And although my third team and my second team were good people and did their best for me, deeply unsettling for the thing constantly to be changing, and the new ideas and new set and new this and new that. And I just, in the end, I because of the lack of sort of stability, I was wide open to the suggestion that 150 editions was enough.
Well, you're listening to the LBC Book Club with me, Ian Dale, and Peter Sissons, who's published his memoirs, When One Door Closes. It's actually out tomorrow. The time now is 9:46. To the LBC Book Club with me, Ian Dale, and Peter Sissons. Now, he's just brought out his memoirs, When One Door Closes. Declaration of interest here. It's published by my company, Bite Back. It's out in hardback at $17.99. I don't know why I had to look at the cover then, because I know it's $17.99. Right, we've got a question for you, Peter, from Fezzi. Who would make up your perfect Question Time panel?
Well, I was talking about when the production team on Question Time changed, they generally had to tender for the programme, and one of the things they were asked to do, for some reason, is give us your thoughts about who should make the ideal panels for Question Time. And they used to concoct panels. Well, that's great. You can say we'll have the Pope, we'll have the President of the United States, but of course,
and Timmy Mallet.
When you start. When you start going down the list, crossing them off because they say no, you've really got to have who's available. So you can do a wonderful wish list of people you'd like to have on a Question Time panel. For a start, party leaders would never appear on Question Time. So that ruled out Margaret Thatcher, who would have been... I mean, if you're doing a wish list for Question Time, I would have put Margaret Thatcher's name on the piece of paper. And then you'd put someone like Dennis Healey next to her. And that in itself would guarantee fireworks. And then perhaps you put in a union leader like Arthur Scargill, who in his prime, love him or hate him, and a lot of people hated him, but a lot of miners hated him by the time the miner strike was over. He was brilliant on Question Time because he just had this amazing knack of whatever rubbish he spouted, people would applaud it because of the cadences and the there's always an element of truth in what he'd say, enough for people to say, until they really think it through. And Scargill had an amazing knack. And then if you want someone from the great and the good on the same panel, I would put in David Shepherd, the former Bishop of Liverpool, who was a truly saintly man, a man that I admired very, very much, and really deeply believed that although he was not party political, because he did so much good work for my home city, with Derek Warlock, the Catholic Archbishop, Shepherd took issue with Thatcher and with Tebbit, and harried them and wrote critically of what they were doing to the inner cities in places like Liverpool, and they fought their corner. You know, they thought that places had to take tough medicine at the time, but Shepherd fought for the people of Liverpool, and he would be a tremendous panellist.
Now, do you think that politics now lacks these great personalities? We've been talking about this in the programme earlier on tonight, and I think it's something that probably people in every age say, well, they aren't like they used to be, but I think it's true now, isn't it?
Oh, it's certainly true. Who are the big beasts? Terrible expression, isn't it? I heard Ed Balls referred to the other day as a big beast. Now, come on, he's a very competent guy, but you couldn't possibly describe him as a big beast in the sense that Healy was, or Heseltine. These were political giants. I mean,
we've still got people like Ken Clarke around.
Well, I mean, he's past his prime, but in his time, what I admired Ken Clarke most for was the fact that at a time when very, very few government ministers were prepared to debate with their opposition shadows, and that was routine in the 80s and 90s. Clarke was the one exception. When he was a minister, he would debate with anybody. Bring them on. Bring on the shadows. Bring on the opposition. I'll talk to them. I'll flay them with my arguments, and I'll take what they can dish out to me. A really pugnacious character, and I think that the ability of where are the street fighters among our politicians now? I think a lot of it's got to do with the fact that the politician who had a job outside politics has gone. It's now regarded as a bad thing, but it did actually mean the House of Commons had a huge numbers of people who had experience of the real world, where they held senior positions and often still did. I mean, that's why the House didn't sit till 2 PM so they could do their morning jobs. And I think that the lack of experience of the real world among politicians now is quite worrying, actually.
Apart from Biafra, which you'll obviously remember for reasons you've already explained, what news story do you remember most? What was the most unforgettable news story that you've covered?
Probably the most shocking was the death of Diana, in the sense that it was the people's princess had been cruelly lost her life in a Paris underpass with a Muslim playboy, had all the elements. But of course that was overshadowed by 9/11. That was certainly the most awful event which I was associated with the coverage. I was newscasting that day. I didn't get to New York or anything like that. But it was an event that changed the world, as well as left a great big.
And is that kind of breaking news event, that's where people like you really earn your money, because one mistake in that coverage and it's something that you'll be remembered for forever?
Well, I think I make the point in the book on a number of occasions that everyone goes on about what was the BBC's editorial line, and did they lay down this and did the bosses do that. The way it actually works is that poor sod who's in front of the camera or the microphone when the story breaks makes it up as he or she goes along, and it is quite a responsibility as well as a great privilege to be sitting there when a major story breaks around you, and suddenly you are living on you're living on your wits, yes, as a performer and as someone technically who's got to do it, but also you have to draw on all your journalistic experience and knowledge and recall of similar events or things that have happened in the past with a bearing on it, and without which you couldn't possibly do your job, and that's why it is, in my view, very important that our news anchors today have a good grounding in reporting.
You've been quite critical of the BBC in the book, and come under some criticism for that. People saying, well, it's all very well for you to say this now, why didn't you say it when you were there?
Well, I stuck in there because I thought I could make a difference, and I think you'll find that I did make myself. I was a bit of a pain in the backside for them from time to time internally. I would go and argue the toss with the head of news if something I thought things were going wrong, and I think I still think I probably was able to have some influence, but it never crossed my mind that I should walk away because I didn't like what was going on. What I wanted to do all the time was stay and argue my corner, because that would be in the public interest. And I think that, that there are good people in the BBC who've got to be supported. But if you're a freelance, of course, you don't have the same vulnerability as the staffers do. The staffers, if they step out of line, then their career prospects, promotion prospects go out of the window. But if, as a freelance like me, I can speak my mind, because at the end of the day, I can walk out the door.
Well, Peter, thank you very much for joining us tonight on the LBC Book Club. Our hour is almost up. Peter's book is called When One Door Closes. It's priced $17.99, published in hardback. And of course, you can also download podcasts of all the LBC Book Clubs that we've had over the last few months. Last week was Alistair Campbell. Now, I'll be back on Wednesday. Julia Hartley-Brewer is sitting in for me tomorrow, and Clive Bull is coming up next.